Imagine you are looking at a giant global scoreboard. You're scanning the list of every country on Earth, looking at a ranking of standard human development.
Right, like a massive leaderboard of human progress.
Exactly. So you scroll down past the absolute elite, past the top 10, past the top 20, and eventually you land on a country sitting at 44th place.
Which is, I mean, that's a respectable
Well,
score.
it is. It's very good, actually.
Oh.
Solidly upper middle class in the neighborhood of nations, I guess you could say.
Right, 44th out of nearly 200 countries. They're doing well, but they're not exactly the global valedictorian.
Yeah, but now imagine someone flips a switch on the scoreboard. A completely new filter is applied. Suddenly, the ranking isn't just about how wealthy or healthy or educated the citizens are.
Okay.
This new filter adjusts the score to account for the environmental impact, the literal planetary pressure that the country generates to, achieve that lifestyle.
Right, the environmental cost of doing business, basically.
Yes. And the moment that filter is applied, the country at 44th place instantly skyrockets. I mean, it vaults up 25 spots in the blink of an eye, landing as the 19th most developed nation on Earth.
Which is just, it's a statistical paradox, honestly. A 25-place jump on a global index at that level is practically unheard of.
And the country that pulled this off is Slovakia.
Yeah.
So to figure out how they beat the system, we are looking at an incredibly comprehensive 15-page academic report. And this thing analyzes United Nations data spanning all the way from 1990 to 2023.
It's a massive data set.
It really is. We are going to deconstruct this 33-year time lapse on today's deep dive to understand how this Eastern European nation became a hidden champion and, honestly, a global model for sustainable development.
Yeah, because we are looking at 33 years of rigorously collected, multidimensional data here. It spans health, wealth, education, gender dynamics, carbon emissions, the works.
It's not just one number.
No, not at all. When you look at UN statistical databases over more than 3 decades, you're essentially reading the DNA of a society's evolution.
Wow.
And it is incredibly rare to see a nation maintain upward momentum across so many different vectors simultaneously, especially given the historical context of where Slovakia actually started in 1990.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can truly understand the mechanics of what Slovakia has pulled off over the last 3 decades, we really have to understand the tools the UN actually uses to measure, quote-unquote, success.
Right, we have to decode the alphabet soup of the UN data.
It is totally an alphabet soup. I mean, HDI, IHDI, GII, PHDI. It sounds like impenetrable academic jargon.
It does, yeah. But these acronyms represent a truly massive philosophical shift in how humanity measures progress.
So let's start with the granddaddy of them all, the HDI, the Human Development Index.
The classic.
Right. So from the report, this measures lifespan, knowledge, and living standards.
And, to understand why HDI is so important, you really have to look at what it replaced.
Good point.
Because before 1990, which is the exact year our data set begins, by the way, the world almost exclusively judged a country's success by its GDP, its gross domestic product.
Purely economic.
Exactly. It was a purely economic measurement.
Just sheer output. Like, if a country produced a lot of stuff and moved a lot of money around, it was deemed successful.
Right.
But that is a terrifyingly narrow lens. There's this classic economic paradox about the flaw of relying solely on GDP that I always think about.
Oh, the environmental spill one.
Yes. If a country experiences a massive chemical spill in a major river, it has to spend billions of dollars on hazardous material crews, legal fees, medical treatments for poisoned citizens, water purification systems.
And all of that spending actually increases the country's GDP.
Exactly. The economy looks, on paper, like it is booming.
Meanwhile, the environment is completely devastated and the people are sick.
Right. Their actual well-being plummeted, but the economic measurement went up.
Because GDP counts everything except that which makes life worthwhile. It essentially treats the destruction of natural capital as income.
Which is so messed up.
It really is. So in 1990, the UN introduced the HDI to look at 3 fundamentally human things. 1, are people living long, healthy lives? 2, are they acquiring knowledge through education? And 3, do they have a decent standard of living that affords them dignity?
It was a huge leap forward. But as our understanding of society evolved, Economists kind of realized that standard HDI was hiding a lot of vital information about distribution, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why the UN introduced the IHDI, or Inequality-Adjusted HDI.
Okay, break that down for us.
So this metric actually deducts points from a country's score based on internal inequality. It shows you the true score after you account for how unevenly health, wealth, and education are distributed among the population.
I always look at the IHDI like a leaky pipe system. Imagine a government pumps 100 gallons of water representing, national wealth and infrastructure from a reservoir to a town.
Okay, I like this analogy.
Right. So standard HDI just measures the 100 gallons leaving the station, but IHDI measures how many holes are in the pipes. If 20 gallons leak into the dirt before reaching the citizens' faucets because of, say, corruption or structural poverty or lack of rural access, the IHDI penalizes the country for that leak.
That is exactly how the math functions. It's brilliant. And then the UN added another diagnostic tool, the GII, or Gender Inequality Index.
Right.
This one measures reproductive health, empowerment, and labor market status. Basically, it isolates the data to see if a country is utilizing its entire population's potential or if there are structural barriers suppressing half of it.
And finally, the newest and perhaps most revolutionary metric in the report, the PHDI, the Planetary Pressures Adjusted HDI.
The game changer.
Totally. This one deducts points for per capita carbon dioxide emissions and the material footprint of the country. So going back to my pipe analogy.
Please do.
If the IHDI measures the leaks in the pipe, the PHDI measures whether the water pump is running on a massive polluting coal furnace that is slowly suffocating the town.
That's a great way to put it. The shift to looking at all four of these indices represents a profound maturation.
It really does.
We moved from asking, how much money do we have,
Hmm.
to how long and well do we live, to is that well-being shared fairly, and finally to are we destroying the planet to achieve it?
It's a completely different paradigm for evaluating human civilization. So, with our measuring stick clearly defined, let's look at the baseline. Where was Slovakia on the standard HDI scale when this data tracking began in 1990?
Well, if we look at the UN data from 1990, Slovakia's HDI was 0.698.
Okay.
In the UN categorization system, that is considered a medium development level.
We really need to pause and establish what 1990 actually looked like for the people living there. I mean, the Iron Curtain had just fallen.
Right.
The Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia had just occurred in the late 1989. The country was about to undergo a massive, painful transition from a centrally planned, Soviet-style economy to a free market democracy.
An incredibly turbulent time.
State-owned heavy industries were about to face global competition for the absolute first time. And shortly after, in 1993, the country would undergo the Velvet Divorce, peacefully splitting into two independent nations, the Czech Republic and Slovakia.
That is a baseline defined by total systemic upheaval.
Yeah.
Transitioning entire economic, political, and social systems usually results in a massive collapse in human development.
Like we saw in a lot of other places.
Exactly. If you look at the demographic data of many other post-Soviet states during the 1990s, you see life expectancies plummeting, mortality rates spiking, and deep systemic poverty taking root as the old state apparatus just vanished overnight.
Yeah.
It was a time of profound vulnerability.
But the data shows Slovakia didn't collapse.
No, it didn't.
From that 0.698 in 1990, they embarked on a 33-year steady ascent. Fast forward to the end of the data set in 2023, Slovakia's HDI reached 0.880.
Which officially classifies them in the highest possible tier. Very high human development.
That is a roughly 26% improvement over 33 years.
And human development indices are not like tech stocks. They don't just double overnight.
Right.
Moving the needle on a nationwide life expectancy or average years of schooling takes decades of generational investment. You're talking about building hospitals, training thousands of teachers, and fundamentally changing the dietary and health habits of millions of people.
It's structural.
Very much so. To achieve a 26% jump while entirely rebuilding your government and economy from scratch is a monumental feat of societal engineering.
Let's put that 0.880 score into a global context for you listening right now. In 2023, the global average HDI is only 0.756.
Right.
So Slovakia leads the global average by a massive 16.4%.
And the report also highlights their resilience to modern shocks, specifically the COVID-19 pandemic.
Oh yeah, the V-shaped recovery.
Exactly. We see a distinct V-shaped recovery in the data. Like almost everywhere else in the world, Slovakia's HDI dipped during the pandemic, falling to 0.859 in 2021 as life expectancy temporarily dropped and the global economy froze.
Which was expected everywhere.
Right. But they didn't stagnate. They bounced right back to 0.880 by 2023, entirely surpassing their pre-pandemic levels.
Now, a high average score of 0.880 is fantastic, but we know that an average can mask a deeply fractured society.
Oh, yes, it can.
You can have a country with a booming tech sector in the capital city, driving up the national GDP and average education metrics, while the rural areas are just completely hollowed out.
The billionaire walking into a bar analogy.
Exactly. If one billionaire walks into a bar, the average wealth in the room skyrockets, but nobody else actually got any richer. If the pie is growing, but only 10% of the population is eating it, the HDI is essentially lying to us. So how real is this 0.880 score for the average Slovakian?
Well, to answer that, we turn to the IHDI, the inequality-adjusted HDI.
The leaky pipes.
The leaky pipes. This metric strips away the illusion of the skewed average. And this is exactly where the data reveals Slovakia's true strength. Because when you look at the 2023 data for the entire world, the global average loss in human development due to internal inequality, it's a staggering 22.0%.
A 22% loss globally.
Yeah.
Going back to our analogy, that means the global average country is losing more than a fifth of its human potential to structural leaks.
It's huge.
I mean, imagine you, the listener, get your paycheck every 2 weeks, but before you can even touch it, a system error just permanently deletes 22% of your money.
Ouch.
It's not a tax that goes to roads or schools. It just vanishes into thin air due to systemic friction. Imagine waking up every day and knowing that a fifth of your potential health outcomes and educational access is just gone because of how unequal your society is.
It is a devastating loss. For a vast portion of humanity, the impressive sticker price of their country's progress is an illusion they never actually get to experience.
But then we look at Slovakia.
Right. When we look at Slovakia's IHDI, their loss due to inequality is an incredibly low 5.3%.
Wow.
Their IHDI value is 0.833, leaving them with an over 94% retention of their development achievements.
Here's where it gets really interesting. A 5.3% loss compared to a global average of 22%. They have engineered a pipe system where they only lose a few drops. You are keeping almost 95% of your paycheck of human progress.
What the data tells us is that Slovakia is one of the most egalitarian countries in the world in terms of distributing human development outcomes. The country acts as an incredibly efficient distribution engine.
That's a great term. Distribution engine.
Yeah, it isn't just generating wealth or building elite universities for a select few. It is ensuring that the baseline floor for health and education is remarkably high for the vast majority of its citizens.
So how does the mechanics of that distribution engine actually work? I mean, post-communist transitions often led to oligarchies, right? Where a few insiders bought up all the state assets and created massive inequality. How did Slovakia build this egalitarian engine instead?
It really comes down to universal systems and how they manage that transition. Despite the shift to a market economy, Slovakia maintained robust, universal social safety nets that they inherited and modernized from the previous era.
Okay, that makes sense.
When a country has only a 5.3% inequality loss, it means there isn't a massive gap between the life expectancy of the rich and the poor. It means that access to quality primary and secondary education is widespread, rather than sequestered in expensive private institutions.
Right.
Healthcare access is geographically distributed, not just clustered in the capital, Bratislava. The societal safety nets are tight enough that fewer people fall through the cracks.
Wait, we just established that this equity engine distributes education and healthcare almost perfectly across the board. But I'm looking at the demographics, and society is rarely that uniformly perfect.
Oh, definitely not.
Does this 95% equity hold up if we draw a line between men and women?
The gender equation. This section of the report presents a highly nuanced picture. It's one of incredible progress functioning alongside persistent structural gaps.
Okay, let's hear it.
Let's look at the Gender Inequality Index, the GII. Remember, a lower score here is better. It means less inequality in reproductive health, empowerment, and the labor market.
Got it. Lower is better.
In 1990, Slovakia's GII was 0.268. By 2023, it had dropped significantly to 0.176. That places them 49th globally, which is far better than the global average GII of 0.455.
That is a solid trend line. But the stat that completely stopped me in my tracks was the GDI, the Gender Development Index.
Oh yeah, this is a fascinating number.
This metric compares the standard HDI of women directly to the standard HDI of men. A score of 1.0 means perfect parity. The report states that in 2023, the HDI for women was 0.879, and for men it was 0.880.
Right.
That makes the GDI value an astonishing 0.999.
It's practically a statistical type.
Yeah.
0.999 means that overall, women and men in Slovakia are experiencing almost the exact same aggregate level of human
Hold
development.
on, wait. I'm looking at the income column right now, and women are making over $14,000 less than men.
They are, yes.
The men's gross national income per capita is $44,016, and the women's is $29,901 goal. You can't call a society statistically equal when a massive wage gap like that exists. How on earth is the UN math justifying a 0.999 score here? I mean, is the index broken?
The index isn't broken. It is revealing a mathematical balancing act. The GDI is near perfect because women in Slovakia possess distinct, overwhelming advantages in health and education that effectively offset that massive gap in income.
Oh, I see.
The UN formula weighs all three dimensions, health, education, and income, equally.
So if the UN math weighs longevity and education heavily enough, it completely papers over a major wage gap. That's a fascinating philosophical choice by the statisticians.
It really is.
Let's dig into those advantages then. What does the educational edge look like?
On the education front, Slovakia as a whole is highly educated. The country boasts an expected years of schooling, or EYS, of 14.9 years, and a mean years of schooling, or MYS, of 13.1 years.
To give you some context on that, if you're listening, the global average for mean years of schooling is only 8.7 years. Slovakia is beating the global average by roughly 50%.
Right.
A mean of 13.1 years basically implies that the average citizen completes high school and has at least some tertiary, university, or highly specialized vocational education.
And Slovakian women are highly represented in that educational attainment. But where the female advantage truly spikes, driving up that GDI score, is in health and survival.
Yeah, the longevity numbers are wild.
Slovakia has a phenomenal overall life expectancy, but the gender split is stark. Women have a life expectancy of 81.6 years, while men sit at 75.0 years.
That is a 6.6-year advantage for women.
It's substantial. Furthermore, the maternal mortality rate is incredibly low.
I have the exact number here. It is under 5 deaths per 100,000 live births.
Now, compare that to the global average.
The global average is 216 deaths per 100,000 live births. It was a completely different universe.
Under 5 compared to 216. That is what a highly developed universal healthcare infrastructure looks like in practice.
Yeah.
Prenatal care, hospital access, emergency medical intervention is all functioning at a world-class level, creating a massive health advantage that pushes the female HDI score up to match the male score.
Okay, the math makes sense now. Women are highly educated and living nearly 7 years longer, but we still have to address that income gap.
We do.
$44,016 for men versus $29,901 for women. Why does that $14,115 gap exist in a society that educates its women at a world-class level?
It's a complex issue.
And we see a similar lag in political empowerment, too. I mean, female seats in parliament grew from 14.7% in 1990 to 22.0% in 2023, but that actually trails the global average of 26.5%.
So the data reveals structural hurdles that exist globally, and specifically in the Slovakian labor market. Even with equal or better education, women often cluster in sectors that are traditionally lower paying.
Like what?
Like education, healthcare, and social services. Meanwhile, men tend to dominate higher-paying industrial, engineering, or executive roles. You have to remember, Slovakia is a massive manufacturing hub.
Oh, right. The auto industry.
Exactly. They produce a huge number of automobiles, and those industrial sectors skew heavily male. Furthermore, there's the motherhood penalty.
Taking time out of the workforce for childcare.
Right. That disproportionately impacts women's long-term earning trajectories and promotional opportunities.
So the .999 score is mathematically true, but it masks a complex economic reality.
Yes, but we also must contextualize that $29,901 female income.
How so?
Well, while it is $14,000 less than a Slovakian man, it is still double the global average income for women, which sits at just $14,943.
Wow. Okay, yeah.
So a Slovakian woman faces a domestic wage gap, but she possesses twice the purchasing power of the average woman on Earth.
That is a crucial perspective. It's the difference between relative inequality within your own borders and absolute wealth compared to the rest of the world. And regarding the political empowerment, remaining below the global average for parliamentary seats just indicates that the cultural barriers to high-level political leadership are stubbornly persistent.
Absolutely. Knowledge and longevity have not fully translated into equivalent economic power or political authority. It is the frontier of development that Slovakia and, frankly, much of the developed world is still actively navigating.
Now, I just want to remind everyone listening that we are just reporting the demographic data from this academic UN report. We're not making any political endorsements here, just objectively looking at what the numbers say about these different facets of society.
Right, the data is just the data.
Exactly. So let's summarize where we are at. We have built a picture of a society that is highly educated, exceptionally healthy, and distributes its wealth and progress fairly among its population, albeit with a persistent gender income gap.
Which is a remarkable achievement.
It is. But historically, though, when we look at the 20th century, achieving this level of wealth, building world-class hospitals, and sustaining a comfortable middle-class existence requires a massive amount of energy.
Huge amounts. And
Yeah.
historically, that energy has almost entirely come from burning immense quantities of fossil fuels. I mean, you don't get an industrialized economy without factories, power plants, cars, and concrete.
Which brings us to the most mind-bending part of this entire report. What is the environmental bill for Slovakia's success?
Ah, the PHDI.
Yes, we talked about the PHDI, the Planetary Pressures Adjusted HDI, at the very beginning of this deep dive. This is where the switch gets flipped, and Slovakia vaults from 44th in the world to 19th.
The data underlying that jump is stunning. Between 1990 and 2023, per capita carbon dioxide emissions in Slovakia plummeted by an astonishing 54.7%.
Wait, really? Over half?
Yes, they dropped from 11.69 tons per person in 1990 down to 5.3 tons in 2023.
Over 50%. While their human development score was climbing 26%, their carbon emissions dropped by more than half. The lines on the graph literally cross each other in opposite directions.
It's the holy grail of sustainable development.
And the report notes their material footprint, which measures the raw amount of biomass, fossil fuels, metal ores, and non-metallic minerals consumed, has stabilized at around 16.3 tons per person. They are not endlessly consuming more physical earth to maintain their lifestyle.
Right. To truly appreciate this, we need to understand how the UN calculates this planetary pressures adjusted index. The PHDI takes a country's standard HDI score and multiplies it by an adjustment factor.
Okay, what goes into that factor?
It's based on two things: carbon dioxide emissions per person and material footprint per person. If a country emits a lot of carbon and consumes a lot of raw materials, the adjustment factor is low, and it severely penalizes their standard HDI score.
So when we look at the raw data for Slovakia, the report says they suffer a 12.5% loss on the PHDI. Initially, when I read that, 12.5% sounded like a significant penalty. I mean, they are losing an eighth of their score due to planetary pressure.
It sounds like a penalty until you compare it to other highly developed nations.
How so?
Well, many countries in the very high human development tier completely bomb their PHDI. They might rank in the top 10 for standard HDI because they are incredibly wealthy, but when the planetary pressure filter is applied, they free fall down the rankings.
Because of the carbon.
Exactly. They might drop 30, 40, or even 50 spots because their carbon footprints are massive. Their wealth is entirely subsidized by unsustainable ecological destruction.
It's like a business that looks wildly profitable on paper, but when you look at the balance sheet, you realize they're just living on massive amounts of high-interest credit card debt.
That's a perfect analogy. The PHDI is the UN finally calling in the environmental debt.
Exactly. Slovakia loses 12.5%, but because so many other wealthy nations lose significantly more, Slovakia's relative rank shoots up 25 places. What this reveals is that Slovakia's resource conversion efficiency is a global superpower.
Yeah, for every ton of carbon they emit, they are generating a massive amount of human well-being.
The report defines this as the Slovakia model: high welfare, low to medium energy consumption. But this raises an important question. How did they actually achieve this 54.7% drop in CO2? We can't just list the numbers. We have to look at the socio-economic mechanics of this post-Soviet green transition.
Right, the how.
Because part of this has to be the historical context of 1990, right? When the Soviet era ended, a lot of highly inefficient, heavy polluting industries in Eastern Europe simply collapsed.
That is the starting point, yes. The initial drop in the early 1990s was heavily influenced by the restructuring of the post-communist economy. Inefficient heavy manufacturing plants, steel, coal, arms manufacturing shut down or were radically downsized because they just couldn't compete in a global free market.
Right.
But that initial economic shock alone doesn't explain a 33-year trend. If that were the only factor, emissions would have skyrocketed again once the economy recovered and grew.
Right. Eventually, the factories turn back on, the economy booms, and the carbon goes right back up. But it didn't.
It didn't, because Slovakia proactively shifted the fundamental architecture of its energy and industrial sectors. First and foremost, nuclear energy.
Ah, nuclear.
Slovakia invested heavily in nuclear power, specifically the Bohunice and Mochovce nuclear power plants.
Right.
Today, nuclear provides a massive baseload of low-carbon electricity, accounting for over half of their electricity generation.
Wow, over half.
Yeah. It gave them the energy density required for an industrialized economy without the carbon penalty of coal or gas.
That is a crucial piece of the puzzle. While some European countries were shutting down their nuclear grids and inadvertently increasing their reliance on fossil fuels, Slovakia doubled down on nuclear baseload. What else drove the decarbonization?
The second major factor was integration into the European Union in 2004. Joining the EU meant Slovakia had to adopt incredibly stringent environmental standards.
So they were forced to upgrade.
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
They had to modernize their industrial base to comply. This perfectly coincided with Slovakia becoming an automotive manufacturing powerhouse. As we mentioned, they produce the most cars per capita of any country in the world.
Still blows my mind.
But instead of relying on outdated, highly polluting factories, these new automotive plants were built with modern, energy-efficient technologies.
So they transitioned from low-efficiency Soviet heavy industry to high-efficiency EU standard advanced manufacturing. That explains the industrial side. But what about the residential side? People still have to heat their homes through freezing Eastern European winters?
This is where we see a fascinating cultural and infrastructural adaptation. Look at the legacy of Soviet-era panel housing. The massive concrete apartment blocks known as panelaki.
Oh yeah, those iconic brutalist blocks.
Exactly. A huge percentage of the Slovakian population lives in these structures. Originally, they were incredibly energy inefficient. They just bled heat. But over the last 2 decades, there's been a massive, systematic campaign to retrofit and insulate these buildings.
Oh, seriously, just insulating the old buildings.
Adding thermal cladding to millions of apartments drastically reduced the amount of energy required to heat the population.
It's the unglamorous stuff. It's not just, shiny solar panels and wind turbines. It's literal foam insulation on concrete buildings that drives down national carbon emissions.
The mundane solutions are often the most impactful.
It's a systematic, decades-long effort to squeeze more economic value out of less energy. It proves that the old binary argument, you can either protect the environment or grow the economy, is a false dichotomy.
Totally false.
Slovakia proves that you can radically improve education, extend life expectancy, and raise incomes while simultaneously halving your carbon footprint.
Which brings us beautifully to synthesizing all these massive UN data sets into a single, comprehensive view of the invisible champion. Imagine looking at a radar chart of Slovakia, plotting all these different dimensions we've discussed.
Okay, let's build that chart in our minds right now. You listening? Picture a radar chart.
First point on the radar, equity. Measured by the IHDI, we plot that as excellent. They have only a 5.3% loss due to inequality, making their societal pipe system one of the fairest distribution engines on Earth.
Okay, point 1 is excellent. Second point, education. Also excellent. With 13.1 mean years of schooling, their population is highly trained, surpassing the global average by nearly 5 years.
Third point, gender equality, specifically the GDI. We plot that as near perfect. A score of 0.999 shows unprecedented aggregate parity in human development between men and women, driven by massive female advantages in longevity and healthcare access.
And the fourth point, eco-efficiency, measured by the PHDI. This is global leading, vaulting 25 spots into the top 20 worldwide when planetary boundaries are respected, driven by a 54.7% reduction in per capita CO2.
So when you look at that synthesized radar chart, Slovakia emerges as the ultimate proof of concept.
It really does.
It mathematically proves that a country can accumulate vast amounts of knowledge, distribute wealth fairly to avoid systemic poverty, and achieve a highly comfortable standard of living entirely within the finite limits of the Earth's resources.
So what does this deep dive mean for you, the listener, and for the rest of the world? It means we have a blueprint.
But we also have to remember it's not a utopia.
Sure.
The data doesn't lie, and it shows there is urgent work to be done. The $14,000 gender pay gap is a glaring warning light on the dashboard. And remaining below the global average for female political empowerment means the cultural ceiling is still very real. The Slovakia model is a work in progress, not a finished masterpiece.
But as a model for transitioning from a high-carbon, centrally planned past into a green, highly developed, equitable future, the data from 1990 to 2023 is undeniably a triumph.
Absolutely.
Which leaves me with a final thought I want you to mull over. We spend so much time watching the stock market, tracking GDP, and treating the sheer size of a national economy as the ultimate measure of success.
We do. We're obsessed with it.
We celebrate countries that generate massive wealth, even if they are literally burning the planet down to do it. But if a country like Slovakia can quietly figure out how to halve its carbon emissions while radically improving the lives, education, and health of its citizens, does our global obsession with sheer GDP size blind us to what true development actually looks like? Should environmental efficiency be the absolute baseline requirement for being called a first world country?
If you destroy the planet to inflate your GDP, are you truly developed or just temporarily rich?
Exactly. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the 1990 to 2023 UN data. We hope it encourages you to look at your own country's scoreboard and question how your society balances the human drive for progress with the finite pressures of our planet. Because as we saw today, sometimes the real champions aren't the ones making the most noise. They are the ones quietly jumping from 44th to 19th when you finally measure what truly matters.